It's the weekly show with David J. Maloney. This week, David talks to author and podcaster Mike McHargue, aka Science Mike. And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome to everyone at home, and normally I would say our studio audience to the weekly show. I am your host, David J. Maloney. I say normally because we don't have a studio audience today. We actually don't even have our normal studio, which is usually at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. We are shooting off-site with just myself and my assistant producer and our cameraman out of coronavirus concerns. So let's just get right to it. Talk radio show titan Rush Limbaugh is now undergoing treatment for advanced lung cancer. Trump sent him flowers. Pelosi sent him Cuban cigars. And a couple of weeks ago, 20,000 fans packed into the Staples Center to say goodbye to Kobe Bryant, who I truly admired. I really admired his work ethic. And during his brilliant 20-year career, Kobe was one of the few NBA players who never hooked up with a Kardashian. Speaking of Kardashians, Trump recently met with Kim Kardashian at the White House. It was the third meeting between the self-obsessed reality star and Kim Kardashian. New research shows that social media addiction damages relationships, especially with the Attorney General. And former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich, how is his name pronounced, Kyle? Blagojevich. Former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich is now a free man after Trump commuted his sentence. Trump believes in second chances, and I believe him. Look at how many chances he's given his hairstylist. And finally, Colorado State University is announced that it's starting this fall, if school does start back up this fall, that the school offer degrees in marijuana, which gives a new meaning to the phrase higher education. I appreciate you guys watching. Today on the show, we have Mike McHargue. He's also known as Science Mike. He is author of Finding God in the Waves. He also has a new book about to drop called Your Miracle and a Pain in the Ass. And we're going to be catching up by Skype right after these messages. And we are back. We are here with Mike McHargue, also known as Science Mike. How did you get the name Science Mike?
It was a joke at a party. I'm the kind of person who loves science so much that if anyone makes the mistake of asking me a science question, I just run on and on about it. And my friend made a joke and said, "Look at Science Mike rocking the party." And a couple of people laughed and then said that publicly, and it stuck and kind of replaced my name in the public eye.
So instead of me interviewing you in our studio or even where I'd normally do Skype, I'm interviewing you from my home. I presume you're at your home. We're amidst this whole home self-isolation, self-quarantine thing with the coronavirus. It's kind of weird talking about your new book or even filming this show amidst this whole virus thing. These are pretty much crazy times. Do you think that your book, You're a Miracle and a Pain in the Ass, is playing itself out in the real world right now, and how people are responding to this crisis?
It has seemed to be accidentally timely, yeah. That the tension between, trying to think through things clearly and what our emotional brains get us to do seems to be playing itself out in the public square. And it is a bit uncanny.
We see people being, I guess, to some extent, heroes, and then countless examples of others being a pain in the ass. What do you make of that right now?
I think it has to do with the way that we developed as life on this planet. Life is hard. Resources can be scarce. And then we evolved to have cooperative strategies. And so if you look at the way our bodies and brains are structured, our motivations come from a mix of competitive and cooperative strategies. And the factors we see in our environment, how that gets reinforced, determines which one of those strategies we do at any given moment. And so the heroes are those that are leaning deep into the altruistic part of our brains and doing the things that are good for everyone. And the people who are kind of a pain in the ass are the ones who are going, oh my gosh, How do I keep just me and just my family safe? And that tension is really, really playing out.
What are you hearing from the scientific community regarding the virus?
It is significant. This virus is more infectious than the flu and potentially more deadly than the 1918 flu pandemic. What we're hearing from scientists is that so far, Western cultures aren't doing enough fast enough to prevent a serious loss of life.
For our viewers, why is it so important to flatten the curve here in America? And what does that mean to the people who just don't seem to get it yet?
Yeah, I like to look at it this way. Imagine there were only 100 people in America. And if there were 100 people in America, let's say, not that this is to scale, but just for an example, that there were 2 hospital beds. And one of those hospital beds already has someone with cancer in it. Now, let's imagine that because of the infection rate of this virus, we know that 60 or 80 of those 100 people are going to get COVID-19. And we know that if it's 60 people, let's say 20 of them are going to need a hospital bed. Well, if 20 people need hospital beds and we only have 1 available, 19 people could die. And that's why we need to flatten the curve. The goal here is to keep the number of people who need hospital care below the total amount of hospital beds and medical staff we have to provide care for them.
What advice or directives would you give our viewers as we move forward into the days ahead? I mean, I know that you've got a specific hand washing technique you've been teaching. I don't know if that's something that well, actually, you can show it right here on the video. I know there's the whole, this thing that most people miss, the in between the fingers. But go ahead.
Yeah, so washing hands is really important. Anytime that you handle things, you want to sanitize surfaces, and most people wash the hands really poorly. They do this. And if you do ink analysis, that covers very little of the hands. So what they do in operating rooms is you put your palms together and run your fingers through the palms. You switch and do the back of your hand, still handling that. Then you do your thumbs in a rotary motion. And then you finally take your fingers and couple them together and do like this. And if you do all those motions twice, you've done a great job washing your hands. Of course, we also recommend social distancing, which means keeping 6 feet around you at all times, seeing fewer people, seeing them less often. If it's possible for you at this time, or you've been legally mandated to do so, you should stay in your home at all times right now. And people who aren't part of essential businesses or essential operations should be telecommuting. What does essential mean? Essential means if you don't do your job, the basic necessities of human life, like food, water, safety, and shelter, don't happen. In other words, people will die if you don't go to work. Otherwise, you should be setting up telecommuting programs. And if you're the kind of person that runs a company or government organization, the best thing you can do to save lives right now is build out telecommuting processes and plans so your employees can keep working while they are home, because we also need the economy to function for people to have the basic necessities of life.
And that seems to be where it's going to be hurting some people. It's a balance, because you have to be able to maintain the healthcare system while simultaneously retaining the economy, because without the economy, then people starve, or and I know there was hoarding, but at the same point in time, if this goes on for months and months, there's going to be a point in time where questions become as far as food, and there may be food available, but then if you don't have the income coming in to get the food,
that's right.
And then you've got issues with people with childcare, and now and schooling at home, and all those other things.
So we face 2 crises right now. The first is a public health crisis where people can die from a disease. So we have to move on that, and we have to move immediately. But we don't have very much time after we take those measures to then address the second crisis, which is the economic crisis that comes from all of these disruptive activities. And we have to act, and we have to act on both immediately.
Did we jump on this a little too late out of fear that we might cause the economy to get hurt too early? Because the Russians right now, as I understand it, they've only had maybe 1 death, and they've had I think they started like at the end of January jumping on this. Did we miss a window of opportunity?
When you look at an exponential disease growth curve like the one we're in, the earlier you act, the less extreme measures that you have to take. So days matter, and weeks and months certainly matter. And there is no question that in Western societies, including the United States, We simply waited too long to act and are now paying that price in our total caseload.
Now, before we get into your new book, I want to chat for a minute about your first book, Finding God in the Waves, which everyone should go out and buy. For our viewers who haven't heard of it, what is the book about, and what gave your book that title?
Yeah, 46% of people in the United States will go through at least one faith transition in their life, meaning they're part of one faith community, their beliefs change, and they're not anymore. And when I went through a faith transition myself, I realized there are very few resources for people in faith transition. So I wanted to write a book that was a non-judgmental description of the process and practice that happens when your beliefs shift and that impacts your community, as well as what neuroscience has to tell us about what beliefs in God do to our brain-body systems. So it's a book designed for any person who is curious about religious or spiritual things, but is having trouble landing in any particular place, which seems to be a place that millions of Americans find themselves in.
Now, I understand there's a profound story in the book when you describe faking being a Christian for like 2 years to not hurt the people around you, which seems somewhat intriguing. So tell us about that.
It's really simple. When we're part of a religious community, we care for those people that we're with. And so I grew up as an evangelical Christian, and then my beliefs started to change. I actually lost my faith entirely for a period of time. And I knew that if I shared that would be really hurtful and disruptive to people that I cared about, and it would place strain on relationships that were valuable in my life. And so I made the very calculated, and at this time I believe probably inappropriate decision to lie about what I believe to continue with social belonging and keep people feeling safe and comfortable. I included that in the book not to say, hey, the best thing you can do to your friends is lie to them, but to illustrate the amount of pressure people feel when they're part of a faith community and they begin to question the fundamental assumptions of that faith. It can feel terrifying to agree that I don't think many people understand.
That makes sense. Now, one of the most profound insights in your book, at least for me, came when you talked about epilepsy and alien hand syndrome. Can you walk our viewers through that and how you researched, how that research informed your view of faith and doubt?
Yeah, we tend to experience our lives as if we're this cohesive person, this one thing living in the world. And a very strange bit of brain science came out from split brain syndrome, and they would try to save people's lives from life-threatening seizures back in the 60s by doing brain surgery and splitting their corpus callosum. That's a channel of nerves that connects the two hemispheres of the brain together. When they did that, they didn't know what would happen, and when patients woke up, they were fine. They weren't impacted at all, and it really confused researchers how cutting the largest bundle of nerves in the middle of the brain could result in a healthy patient. But as time went on, people found that their hands would start to behave in alien and unpredictable ways, typically people's left hands. So someone would go into their closet and they would reach out for a dress to go to work, and their other hand would reach out and slap that dress out of the way, or even pin their hand to the wall. Or they would try to open a door and their other hand would close it, and they'd open again, the hand would close it. Or they would try to get dressed and they'd button their shirt and their other hand would unbutton it, and this hand was not under conscious control of their brains. Scientists could not figure out what was going on, so they started digging deeper into the research, and one pattern of experiments was teaching the brain, the right brain, which isn't usually verbal, to communicate using letter cards and using prompts on a screen. And they set up a monitor so that you could only see with each hemisphere of your brain independently, which is a complicated setup. And what they found was the right and left brain would answer questions differently. So they asked small children what they wanted to be when they grew up. The left brain, which is very rational, would tend to say something like draftsman or architect, something very simple, where the right brain would answer that they wanted to be a race car driver. And the person had no conscious recollection of saying they wanted to be a race car driver, but that's what their right brain said. And then when they would ask the two halves of the brain, do you believe in God? They found that in many cases, the two halves of the brain did not agree with each other. So you have someone whose left brain was an atheist and whose right brain was a believer. And for me, struggling with what I believed about the world and especially about God, that was so comforting to understand that different parts of my brain can hold and act on different beliefs simultaneously.
If we could just figure out how to make that work so my wife would avoid shoe sales.
that would be quite the science indeed.
So how would you describe your faith journey now? What's the bedrock now that you've found to rest on?
I would consider myself a Christian mystic. So the bedrock of my faith are those times I spend in prayer and in contemplation and in Bible study where I experience God's presence in a very direct way, where I experience God's love, and that love that I experience from God gives me the strength to turn around and love others well and consistently.
Is that more of a faith that is, I guess, how do I put it? That's having faith without necessarily a tie into organized religion, or is it?
I mean, I go to an Episcopal church. I'm pretty open and with faith experiences. I love hearing about everybody's faith journeys. I personally identify as a Christian. I enjoy Christian fellowship and the Eucharist, but I'm fascinated with everybody's spiritual journeys and find that they're all insightful and beautiful and encouraging to me.
Mike, we are going to go to a break right now, commercial just to pay the bills, if there are any bills to pay. And then we are going to come back and talk about your new book, You're a Miracle, and a Pain in the Ass, as soon as we come back.
That's great. Thanks.
And we are back with Mike McHargue. Let's chat about your new book, You're a Miracle and a Pain in the Ass. How did this one come about? Was there like a eureka moment, like in Finding God in the Waves, or did the meat of the book form more subtly?
Much more subtly this time. I started out trying to write a book about how I'd learned, past tense, to be in touch with my feelings and have a life that was enjoying and satisfying, that was based on the wisdom of faith traditions and the most cutting-edge science that we have available. And in the process of trying to research and write that book, my life started to fall apart. I had some significant medical challenges. A dear friend of mine died. My daughter had an eating disorder, and I was diagnosed with autism. And as all these things unfolded, the book became less about like, here's how I live life well and you can too, and more about here's how we survive when things are really challenging, and here's the things I'm struggling to understand about myself and processing in real time with people.
Now, there seems to be two fundamental questions you're addressing in the book. And one is, I guess, why we do the things we do. But almost more importantly, there's one, why we don't do the things that we should. Mm-hmm. Right? Can you kind of walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. The book is an exploration of all the different things that make us. So there are things inside us and outside of us that influence our behavior all the time, and we don't realize it. And there are different structures in our brain that want different things. So there's a part of my brain that feels reward and pleasure every time I eat something salty and fatty. And there's another part of my brain that understands the health consequences of cholesterol. And those brain structures literally fight for control of my life at every moment. And so the book is going through piece by piece and looking at all these factors that influence our behavior simply so we can be aware of them.
So essentially, it's kind of like the pleasure-pain principle, where, you know, most things that we do, if not everything that we do, is either designed towards gaining pleasure or avoiding pain.
Absolutely. And how our desire to avoid pain sometimes is just as problematic as our desire to seek pleasure. And in fact, sometimes we're a little too pleasure paranoid and also too pain averse.
Oh, and that may be playing out kind of with some of the things people are doing right now.
Absolutely.
Even when we talk about things like hoarding and things along those lines.
Mm-hmm. So this is exactly what's happening. The rational decision right now, when our food supply is not interrupted, is to maintain your normal shopping habits. And yet, because people are afraid but they're not fully in touch with that fear and why it's driving their behavior. As a panic reaction, people are hoarding material goods and creating shortages where none exist, which increases a cycle of fear, which only serves to increase the shortages.
Is there one particular thing, most important thing about the like takeaway from the book that you want people to have, or one main thing you hope to accomplish with it?
The things you like about yourself and the things that are frustrating about yourself are all part of systems that are designed to keep you alive. And they've done it. It worked. You've made it. With all the challenges in the world and the fact that most things that live don't continue living and most species that appear go extinct, you represent an unbroken line of the most successful and most miraculous living things that have ever existed.
Now, that raises an interesting question. If the wiring is designed to keep you alive, is there something disconnected in the wiring that leads people to suicide?
Suicide is a complex and difficult topic. It's one that I do address in the book. And effectively, as a social species, it seems like suicide can be a byproduct of an individual believing they are a net negative in a social system, and therefore it becomes like potentially an attempt to protect community from an individual. That's why it's so powerful. We would wonder how on earth an animal could override its survival instincts in order to die by suicide. And research is telling us that it's largely a social factor, which means the epidemic of suicide that we face in this country today could be mitigated by more meaningful and more open social relationships and deeper social connectivity.
We are close to the end now. You've got so much good stuff to share here. But in conclusion, is there a message that you most want to get out in the world right now with your body of work as a whole?
Yes, there is. These are scary and frightening times. And our bodies want to resort to fear and anxiety in the face of uncertainty, and that drives us to make behaviors that will hurt ourselves and hurt other people. So if there's anything I would ask people to do right now, it's beginning to learn to connect with and take caring of their own emotional experiences, because not only will that lead to a more positive life experience, it also helps us behave in more socially responsible ways. Now, while people are stuck at home, the best thing they could work on is themselves.
It makes sense, and it's good words. Where can people find your books, Finding God in the Waves and You're a Miracle and Pain in the Ass? Where can they get these books right now?
The easiest way to find anything I'm doing is to go to AskScienceMike.com, and then you'll find links to everything I do, including those books.
Got it. And if people want to start following your podcasts, which we haven't discussed really at all, but we're running out of time to do it, where can they go to do that?
Anywhere podcasts are downloaded, you'll be able to find my show, Ask Science Mike, as well as a show we'll be launching later this year called How We Feel.
Thank you, Science Mike. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mike McHargue.
Thank you.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I also want to thank Mike McHargue and Volta Studios for stepping in and helping us out in a pinch for video. So hopefully we'll all get through this. Take care.